It's great to be here. And today I will be discussing some of the artworks in the exhibition that I curated at the Cornell Fine Arts Museum entitled The Path to Paradise, The Artistic Legacy of Dante's Divine Comedy, which was staged to commemorate the 700th anniversary of the poet Dante Alighieri's death in 1321. And it features illustrated archival texts alongside artworks depicting episodes from the Divine Comedy. So thank you all for joining me on this exhibition tour. And once again, I do apologize for those technical difficulties earlier. So the Divine Comedy, of course, is a monumental epic poem composed of Dante's Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso. And on the right side of the slide, we can see the artwork featured on the title wall of the exhibition. And it's a late 19th century bronze inkwell bust of Dante, attributed to the Neapolitan foundry of Sabtino de Angelis and Sons. So, before we start looking at art, however, let's get started with a lightning speed introduction to Dante for those who are unfamiliar. So Dante Alighieri was an Italian poet, philosopher, and political theorist who was born in Florence in 1265. So he's perhaps most famous for writing La Commedia, or the Comedy, which was renamed La Divina Commedia, or the Divine Comedy, after his death. So the Divine Comedy was a monumental epic poem consisting of three larger sections, or cantiche, and these were Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso. And each chronicled Dante's supposed journey through a realm of the Catholic afterlife. And in 1283, Dante married Gemma Donati in an arranged marriage. And then in 1302, while Dante was away from Florence and Rome and/or Siena, a faction of the Guelphs, who were a pro-papal political party that Dante belonged to, exiled the opposing faction from Florence. And then if Dante were to return to Florence after this event, he would have been burned at the stake. So he didn't. He was forced to live in exile in Ravenna until his death in 1321. And the Divine Comedy was primarily written in the decade preceding Dante's death, meaning that it was finished in Ravenna. And Dante is actually still buried in Ravenna today. So additionally, if you would like to see a stone taken from the tomb of Dante in Winter Park, you can actually go to the Walk of Fame right around Mills Lawn on Rollins College campus. And there's a stone in the Walk of Fame from the tomb of Dante, just to the left of the entrance to Kathleen W. Rollins Hall. So here we can see a gallery view of the exhibition text for Path to Paradise in the Zolo Lakeview Gallery of CFAM. So this exhibition contains 8 works by a diverse range of artists spanning multiple centuries, from the Italian Quattrocento through the global contemporary. Path to Paradise, the artistic legacy of Dante's Divine Comedy, will be up through August 29th, 2021, and the museum has once again reopened to in-person visitors, so be sure to go check it out and see the other great exhibitions currently on view at CFAM and the Elfont Inn at Rollins College. Additionally, all of our exhibitions are available online as well, so be sure to check out that function too. So I'm just going to read an excerpt from the exhibition wall text in order to help familiarize you with the exhibition. So in the decade preceding his death, the Florentine poet and polymath Dante Alighieri compiled the Divine Comedy, universally identified as a masterwork of Italian literature. In the narrative epic, Dante recounts his journey through the realms of the Catholic afterlife, describing instances of suffering and salvation he witnessed during his travels. Guided by the Roman poet Virgil, Dante explores hell, purgatory, and finally heaven, where Virgil is replaced by Dante's lost love, Beatrice. With its graphic depictions of eternal punishment and redemption, Dante's Divine Comedy has served as an artistic and moral template for artists, writers, politicians, and religious leaders since its original publication. In its over 700 years of existence, the poem has been illustrated by artists including Sandra Botticelli, Gustave Doré, and Salvador Dali. It has been referenced by the likes of John F. Kennedy and Pope Francis. More recently, the poem's first cantica, Inferno, has even been converted into a video game for PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 consoles. And that video game, it was entitled Dante's Inferno, and it was released in 2010. Why is it called Path to Paradise? The reason that I chose Path to Paradise as the title of the exhibition is because of this commonly misattributed quotation on the screen. So, although you can find literally thousands of resources online that insist Dante either said or wrote these words, he did not. So, the attribution is likely meant to reference an episode in Inferno where Virgil, who is Dante's guide through Inferno and Purgatorio, tells Dante that they must traverse those realms to reach Paradiso. And I chose this phrase because it illustrates the immense effect that Dante still holds over contemporary society 700 years after his death. Just the fact that this misattributed quotation is so pervasive and so ubiquitous with Dante, when in reality it's wholly incorrect. I thought that was interesting conceptually to bring into the exhibition, and also its alliteration. Now I would like to briefly speak about all of the works on display in the exhibition. So once again, this is the first work in the exhibition, and it is encased in a glass vitrine next to the exhibition text. So the bust of Dante is hinged to serve as an inkwell at the top, and the ink would have been stored in Dante's skull. So it was likely sold as a souvenir during the Grand Tour, which is a popular travel circuit among young European aristocrats beginning in the late 16th century. And the list of cities visited by early tourists typically included destinations in France, Italy, and the Netherlands, with some travelers exploring more different countries or more distant countries. And the Grand Tour represented the culmination of a classical education, emphasizing the subjects of Greek, Latin, philosophy, and the arts. And Italy served as the artistic and cultural center of the Grand Tour. Naples, for example, the city in Italy, became an increasingly popular destination following the 1748 discovery of Pompeii, an infamous lost Roman settlement preserved under the volcanic ash of Mount Vesuvius. So, thus, the same fascination with the fiery destruction of Pompeii that captivated the globe in 1748 was mirrored in a continued interest in Dante's infernal visions by learned travelers who likely acquired these small objects on their journey. So, the foundry of Septimo de Angelis and Sons was located in Naples, and it likely created multiple versions of this bust in the late 19th century in order to supply, the precursors to gift stores or gift shops and souvenir shops with their wares. Additionally, we have two illustrated texts in the exhibition. The first being an illustrated second edition of Dante's Inferno, illustrated by the Frenchman Gustave Doré and published circa 1885. So this engraving illustrates Canto 13 of the Inferno, when Dante and Virgil traverse the Wood of the Suicides, the location in hell where those who killed themselves are transformed into trees as punishment. So the book is open to this page, the page displaying this illustration in the exhibition. However, this book, the creation of the book, was not easy for Doré. He was actually forced to fully fund the publication of his first edition of Inferno when he was unable to find a publisher that considered the project financially viable. At that point, there were already French translations of Dante that were published, and the publishers were just confused why another edition of the Inferno was needed. But as you can see, Doré illustrated it with over 100 engravings, which were very, very meticulously executed. And then, so after an extremely successful and extremely surprising for the publishing houses release of Inferno in 1861, Doré was immediately offered a contract with a French publishing firm. And then they combined Purgatorio and Paradiso into one volume to expedite the printing process and fully capitalize on a renewed French interest in Dante, basically pretty much owing to that first edition of Inferno published by Doré. So in his engravings, Doré drew inspiration from multiple sources, ranging from the nudes of Michelangelo to the landscapes of Northern Europe. And in other engravings by Doré depicting the same scene, so this would have been published in a different version of the Inferno, but it's also by Doré. The placement of the petrified limbs of the highlighted soul seemed to be inspired by Gian Lorenzo Bernini's Apollo and Daphne, which was completed in 1622 to 1625. And this was a sculpture that pictured the beginning of the mythical Daphne's transformation into a laurel tree. So specifically, we're talking about that figure in the red circle. And if we zoom in on her and compare her to Bernini's sculpture, we can see that Doré was probably referencing this exact artwork in his engraving, which is extremely cool to pick out. But also, it's very likely because at that point and still today, Bernini is an extremely famous sculptor, especially in Europe. And also, this sculpture is one of Bernini's most famous sculptures. So it would have been well known at the time that that Doré illustrated the Divine Comedy. Additionally, this and the many other instances of direct artistic references in Doré's Divine Comedy illustrations show a sustained and meticulous interest in demonstrating the illustrator's knowledge of so-called Western art history. So he was really just in his element, referencing multiple artworks and synthesizing them into a new work of art. So moving on to our next work, the mid-19th century was marked by a renewed scholarly interest in Dantean cartography, or the practice of precisely mapping Dante's visions. And this was, the arguments were held over this by academics who would argue about the height of different levels of the terraces in Purgatory, or the width of the pits in Dante's Inferno. So for some reason, this was a very popular subject, especially in Italian literature of the mid-19th century. So the book that we included in our exhibition is pictured here, opened to a spread depicting the Ordering of Purgatory. And it was originally published in Rome in 1855. And it includes chromolithograph schematics of Inferno, Purgatorio, Paradiso, and their relative positions to one another. So Dante actually described the rings of Inferno as existing in an inverted cone, descending into the center of the earth. And then this cavity was mirrored by the mountainous Purgatory on the planet's opposite pole. And that's what's pictured here. So the concentric spheres of Paradise further surrounded the globe. So this book's scholarly purpose is evident in the diligently labeled Roman numerals in the column at the center of the spread, each corresponding to a canto from Purgatorio. And then at the crown of Purgatory lies Paradiso Terrestre, the earthly paradise of Eden. Additionally, we have two works by the Spanish surrealist Salvador Dali in the exhibition, one illustrating Canto 5 of Purgatorio on the left, and the other illustrating Canto 23 of Paradiso on the right. So in the early 1950s, Dali began work on more than 100 watercolors illustrating Dante's Divine Comedy. So he was commissioned by the Italian government to commemorate the 700th anniversary of Dante's birth, but the series was actually very controversial, especially in Italy. So many Italians believe that an Italian artist, rather than the Spanish Dali, deserved the honor. And although Dali eventually lost the commission due to public outcry, he completed the series independently. And in 1965, Dali's watercolors were published as woodcut prints in a 6-volume illustrated edition, jointly printed by 2 French publishing houses. So the woodcut on the left takes place in Ante-Purgatory, and this is a Dantean invention reserved for those deemed unfit to enter Purgatory. So Virgil's admonishment or warning arrives after the poets are suddenly swarmed by the souls of the late repentant, who are obsessed with Dante's human body and its ability to block light. So Dali depicted one of the souls as a fleshy, organic form with a skeletal face, reinforcing themes of decay and bodily nostalgia present in Ante-Purgatory. And then in the illustration on the right, Dante relays cryptic visions revealed to him as he ascends to the Empyrean, or the realm of God. So the final canticle, Paradiso, is intentionally unstructured when compared to Inferno and Purgatorio. So when Dante was explaining the immaterial nature of paradise, he expressed in Paradiso 1 that earthly objects may be, quote, deaf to divine influence. And his prophetic atomization of matter in Paradiso likely appealed to Dali, who devoted much of his late career to what he termed nuclear mysticism, and the reconciliation of science and religion. So, indeed, the artist hoped that the emerging fields of molecular biology and particle physics would reveal divine truths. And then in Paradiso 23, the canto illustrated on the right, um, Dante experiences two major visions. So, a blinding glimpse of Christ, followed by a revelation of the Annunciation, or the biblical episode when the Archangel Gabriel told the Virgin Mary about her miraculous pregnancy. So in this print, Christ is actually, he appears in the sky between the two giant angels and surrounded by rays of light. And this is very appropriate to the text because in Paradiso, Christ is actually inside of the sun. Dante writes about looking at the sun and seeing Christ inside of it. And then also, he holds a cross and a globus cruciger, or an orb adorned with the cross, representing the dominion of Christ over the earth. So, also, I would just like to take a minute to talk about the differences stylistically in between these two illustrations, because as you can see, the one on the left is kind of more painterly, and while the one on the right almost seems to be kind of like a sketch or more like washed out. And this is seen across the entire portfolio of Divine Comedy prints by Dali. He took many different stylistic avenues. And also, I think that this is just kind of owing to the fact that it was so late in Dali's career. And Dali was very self-referential with this. So even in the paint or the woodcut on the right, there are multiple aspects in that one woodcut that can be seen in the Madonna of Portland, which was a famous painting created earlier by Dali, and he's referencing himself in his artwork. And this happened multiple times throughout the portfolio, and he was really just showing off his skill at depicting these scenes in multiple different styles. Additionally, the largest painting in the Path to Paradise exhibition is entitled The Divine Comedy, and it was completed by a Rollins Studio Art professor named Tom Peterson in 2001 while he was reading, and I believe rereading, the text. So this painting is a new acquisition for CFAM, and we're very happy to have it. So Peterson was a professor of art at Rollins from 1958 to 1992. And although he was initially trained in painting, Peterson expanded his artistic practice to include sculpture, photography, and printmaking. And he frequently collaborated with other artists in the Orlando area. So in this painting, Peterson references multiple episodes from the Divine Comedy, including Inferno 13, the one that we talked about with Dure and the Wood of the Suicides. So as you can see on the right, there are trees, and it looks as if the trees are transforming into humans. So I'm almost certain that this is Peterson's representation of the Wood of the Suicides. And additionally, over on the left, we can see that Peterson depicted Beatrice in triplicate, and this was modeled by the fellow Orlando artist, Rima Jabour. And then, so as you can see, Peterson was very collaborative in his practice, and some of his works are kind of even better defined as a collaboration between multiple artists. So recurring threes by both Peterson and Dante represent the Holy Trinity, and they reference concepts of biblical numerology and kind of the sacred nature of three in Catholicism. And finally, moving down to the end of the hallway, so this engraving was published in one of the earliest illustrated mass-produced editions of Dante's Inferno, which was printed by the Italian goldsmith and engraver Baccio Baldini in 1480s Florence. So Baldini likely copied drawings illustrating the Divine Comedy by Sandro Botticelli, one of his Florentine contemporaries. Unfortunately, the original Botticelli drawings from Inferno 2 were lost. But Baldini planned to translate all 100 of Botticelli's Dante illustrations to engravings, which was a bold attempt that ultimately failed. So by the time Baldini's edition of Inferno was published, only about 19 engravings were ready to be included, and many books were printed and sold containing even fewer illustrations. So ultimately just represented a technical difficulty with transferring so many images to one of the first illustrated books that was ever attempted. or mass-produced illustrated books. But so Beatrice it can be witnessed kind of in the center, materializing in the sky, and she's offering some encouraging words to Dante about his looming journey. And then above the ominous portal to hell on the right side of the engraving, the words per me are carved, meaning through me in Italian. And these are the first two words of Inferno 3. So it's just linking the scene chronologically to others in the series. And then finally, we have another sculptural work in the exhibition that wasn't actually inspired by the Divine Comedy because it predates it. But artifacts like this they actually went on to inspire some of our illustrators, specifically Baccio Baldini, who we just discussed on the last slide. So here we have a Roman sarcophagus from the 2nd century CE depicting the rape and abduction of the Sabine woman. So it is at the end of the Zola Lakeview Gallery in the exhibition, and this act of sexual violence that's happening on the front of the sarcophagus is part of the founding mythology of Rome. And in that sense, even though it is a rape scene, it would have served to heroize the person interred inside of the sarcophagus. So before the 1st and 2nd centuries CE, Romans primarily relied on cremation to honor their dead. However, burial soon surpassed cremation with the introduction and popularization of the sarcophagus. Early sarcophagi were either blank or featured a wreath of vegetal matter, while later sarcophagus styles evolved to include abstract patterns and images of people either battling or reveling or partying. So here, this one isn't in the exhibition, but we can see another work by Baldini, the same artist that we talked about 2 slides ago with Dante and Virgil with the vision of Beatrice, that is reproduced on the exhibition label of the sarcophagus. So in this illustration, Canto 10 of Inferno, we can see that marble sarcophagi actually served as implements of torture in Dante's Inferno. So after entering the city of Dis in the 6th circle of hell, Dante described witnessing the punishment of the Epicureans, or those who believed in life that their souls would die with their physical bodies. So the artist depicted at least 8 unique styles of marble sarcophagi, inspired by legitimate examples from antiquity, and further embellished by the artist's imagination. And although there's no direct connection between the specific sarcophagus included in the exhibition and Baldini's engraving here, the sarcophagus still served as an example of a type of artifact that would have inspired the artists illustrating the Divine Comedy. So I would like to take the time to thank the Cornell Fine Arts Museum and its wonderful staff, the Rollins College Archives and Special Collections at Olin Library, Dr. Fred W. Hicks for funding my position, both Dr. Yazela Carbonell, the curator, and Dr. Anna Heller, the Bruce A. Beal director of CFAM, for providing their unending support, Professors Zhang and Walton from the library, and Dr. Kimberly Dennis for support with translating Italian. I certainly could not have done anything without you guys. Thank you all. And thank you for coming, taking the time to visit and come along on this virtual tour with me. Once again, Path to Paradise, the artistic legacy of Dante's Divine Comedy, will be on view in the Cornell Fine Arts Museum until August 29th. Alternatively, try out our virtual 360-degree exhibition space on the CFAM website, which I believe will be linked in the chat. So now I would like to open the discussion to viewer questions.